Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature successful business leaders, top law firms, green energy companies, and more. Today, we're fortunate enough to be joined by a man who was once the president of BlackBerry, the CTO of Ericsson mobile phones and Sony platforms, the executive vice president of AMD, and the current COO of a very cool startup called Uhnder. Welcome, Sandeep Chennakeshu. Welcome.
Thank you, Matt. It's a privilege to be on your show.
The privilege is all ours. And before we get too far into it, a quick word from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. Cyberlinks is a complete technology solution provider that ensures your business has the most reliable and professional IT service and the only company that guarantees your safety and satisfaction. In this day and age, we rely on technology for just about everything. And if your company isn't getting exceptional support for its IT needs, it's not performing optimally. And Sandeep, as an engineer and technology business leader, you know better than most the importance of optimization for business, which is one of the many reasons why I'm so excited to have you on the show here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. So you have written a great book here. Your company is Your Castle. I absolutely loved it. I thought, it's a really great read, having gone through that whole business school, education and getting to see, from your perspective, being, working at such a high level in tech and also in business, kind of merging those together. I think it really creates a really great view and some really great information for people that's really applicable and not just academia. So excited to have you on the show and wanted to ask you, what was your, the whole premise for writing it? What inspired this?
Great question. I always wanted to write a book because I do write a lot. I write a lot on technology articles, finance, economics. So when I wanted to write the book, I started around 2019. I asked myself, what would I write about? And then it struck me that when I was 38 or 39, I got promoted to running a billion-dollar business, a multi-hundred millions, but close to $1 billion business. And I was technically adept. Well, that's what someone thought because they promoted me to being the general manager. But I had no clue of business, even though I have a management diploma and absolutely no clue. So I made a ton of mistakes. I cannot believe they still kept me there. But what I found is by learning, I use this phrase quite often. I said every stumbling block became a stepping stone for success. And I learned, I corrected the mistakes, got stronger in the process. And I said, what if I write about how I built this framework of running a successful business from scratch and impart that knowledge that I had learned through my journey of being through the school of hard knocks.
Yeah.
And so that's why I basically decided to write the book so that others can use it and not probably fall into the same traps and pitfalls and mistakes I made.
Yeah, no, it's funny because when you learn it in a book or you learn it in school, all of those lessons are so cheap. And then when you learn it on your own, it is so costly for every single one. You're like, ugh, I knew that, I read that, but it's so hard to kind of, really implement some of those lessons. But I think kind of the way that you go about talking about it in the book, I like your castle analogy. I think it creates a really nice visual for people to kind of understand. So I really like that. And I like your perspective on, how did castles do it, right? I mean, how is it they've been standing for so many years and make this work? And then I think it's interesting how that really does apply to business. You apply that really beautifully in the book. So kudos on that. I mean, it's not easy to do, but I think you pulled it off beautifully here. So I
Thank you so
enjoyed
much.
that part of it. But let me ask you. So you go into a lot of things, and I think for the small business owner, I think that you hit planning really heavily in your book, right? And I think that was one of the big takeaways for me is, and I can't really attribute it to the fact that you're an engineer who likes the details and the plans so much as was just smart business too, right? So you having worked at BlackBerry and Ericsson at those levels, you're doing all of this planning, and you kind of have to, right? It's kind of built into the system. But then you go and impart that on the small business owner. So my question there is, do you think that same level of planning, that you used at, say, BlackBerry and Ericsson, is it do those same levels, the same sort of planning? Does that really do you think that applies to the small startup who's like, 1, 2, 3, 5 people? Do you still apply it the same way?
Well, I think it's a little different. You need planning. More complex businesses require more detailed planning. And it's in various aspects, like the 8 things that I talk about in the book. All the 8 structures, those are established businesses. So you need very detailed planning and to make sure that all of them are connected. Now, today I work in a startup. A startup is much smaller. You know, um, Normally the companies that I worked in, there were 10,000 employees. And here I have 150. And even that's large
Yeah.
compared to startups. But so the planning is different. Typically startups have 1 or maybe 2 products, not a whole host. But you still need that planning. For example, one of the biggest things in a startup is how do you manage cash so you don't run out of it? Whatever you raise, your investors want you to make it last as long as possible. Because if you raise another round, they get diluted.
Mhm.
And they want to know that you can weather storms like today. The market is tough. How do you raise money? So we got to plan carefully to say, how does that cash last? Not just spend as you feel like and then suddenly realize you're out of it, right? How do you basically take your limited resources and make it resourceful so you can deliver? So because you have to be a switch hitter in uh, a small business. You've got to wear multiple hats, but how do you divide your time efficiently to do different things? That requires careful planning. And how do you make sure you don't chase shiny objects? Because when you do, you get distracted. And if you get distracted, then this whole concept of being efficient and resourceful goes out of the window and you waste money. So the planning is at a different level, uh, but I think it's the concepts remain the same, right? It's only the complexity that changes.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on, and I think that was one of the nice parts about your book is how that applies. So I'm always taking obviously the small business perspective because well that's where I am, and so I think this applied so nicely to small business, and you can see how it came from large business, and I really liked how that played in there. Um, you talked about the sales funnels and sales forecasting, and you do a really nice job in the book discussing that. So I won't spoil the ending for people. But I am curious, with your current startup at Under, kind of that contrast and how that differs in the sales funnel and the sales forecasting in your startup versus say at BlackBerry or
Yeah, you see, in the bigger companies, we had an established process, an established system. We had a lot of tools, and we had basically implemented a framework and models. And so it's all set, right? And then you just have to make sure the model works and people are doing what they're supposed to do. In a startup, we had no tools, we had no forecasting, we had pretty much, other than very clever people. And then suddenly the customer says, oh, guess what? We actually like your product, and we're not going to ask you for thousands of chips now. We're going to ask you for hundreds of thousands of chips. And then we had to go from manual testing, where we tested each chip manually, to an automated test line, right? And that's where the knowledge from working in a bigger company came to play. And I said, okay, I know how to set this up, right? But it's going to take me 6 months to 9 months. So this is the investment we need to make. This is the test floor setup. This is the way we're going to forecast. This is the way we're going to model cost, the yield in the factory, the quality systems. So the nice thing is I've been through that in a different situation, and I could bring that to bear. And, by the middle of the year, we'll be up and running, being able to produce what our customers want.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, no, there's no substitute for experience. I mean, you hear it all the time. I love founder stories and people talking about how they came up with the idea, they financed it, they got going, and then they hit something like that. And if you've never been through something like that, and you're kind of inventing the wheel as you go, you're not going to have nearly the same success as you would in your case, where you're like, oh, I know exactly how we do this, and then you can use that experience to to implement that much faster. So
yeah, but like even if we didn't have the experience, there are 3 or 4 of us who have 30 plus years in this field, and it's not just me and this team of people. So we knew exactly where to buy our equipment. Okay, how to shorten the lead time for delivery in this environment. Who do we contract with, and closing contracts, setting up the entire factory line, then getting the quality and monitoring processes and writing documents so that we know that when we run, everything will come out to be of good quality, right?
Yeah.
Writing all the tests that we needed, and setting everything up, including having very tough discussions with our customers, telling them, no, you have a lead time. You've got to stick to it. If you don't, I'm not selling you parts.
That's
because
right.
I just can't, of course, there's no magic in this, right? If you're not disciplined. And what's interesting is in our startup, actually, one of our biggest customers actually told us that, all through the pandemic time, when there was terrible shortages of chips in the industry, and we were the only supplier who never shorted them.
Wow.
And so it comes down to, again, I say it comes down to not having more people. You don't need more people. You don't need a company. You need the right people.
Yeah.
And there's only 5 in the team. And because they have a lot of experience, they were able to partition the work and do things systematically to get things done.
Yeah. And you hear that, time and time again. It's not, it really does come down to who you surround yourself with, who's on your team. I mean, that makes or breaks it. It doesn't matter if it's sports or what it is. If you don't have great teammates, you're going to have a much harder time winning the game.
Yeah. And also, you've got to, I use this word switch hitter, but, we are non-hierarchical, which means that, if I have to write documents, I write documents.
Yeah.
Right? If I have to help with design, go help with design. If I have to help with program management, you go help with program management, and vice versa for my team. So that helps a lot when everybody knows that they've got to contribute and not just throw stuff over the fence and think it's going to happen.
Yeah, that's it's a good point. And and I guess kind of to your point, you mentioned in your book about being battle tested. And I guess that's, can you tell us a little bit more about that? Because you've got some stories in there about your battle testing. Is there one you'd like to share?
Yeah, sure. One of the when I was just out of school, I just finished my PhD. I tell the story in the book, but let me repeat it, and I'll tell you a few others. But what happened is that I got into this program, and we were contracted by a very big company to build a very special piece that would go into their phone. It was an algorithm. So when you have signals bouncing off buildings and coming to you, they interfere. These echoes interfere with each other, and it it's very difficult to hear someone's voice or get data. So I had to build this algorithm called an equalizer that actually removed all of this strange things that are happening. Okay. And I was straight out of school. Nobody had built this in the world. And they just gave it to me and said, go do it. And that was the first time I felt, okay, it's not
sure,
like
it's never been done. I'll do it.
Get a grade. I'm not going to get a grade. If I fail, the contract goes away. We're not getting another contract. I'm going to lose my job.
Yeah.
So it's a different level of pressure. And it actually, the way I was able to do it was thanks to my managers and others that they actually helped me plan. Again, I didn't just dive into stuff. I did a lot of research as to what was the likely chance of something working. And then built the models and said, okay, I've got a good shot. And that's how I got everything to work within 1 year. Okay. Nice. Another example is in 2003, I was asked to come and fix a company in Sweden. Fascinating opportunity. This company was bleeding. They'd spent close to $1 billion and they hadn't produced a product. And it was a foreign country for me, but we had a lot of customers, everything riding on this company actually producing their chips and software. And everyone had written us off because there were bigger competitors who were promising things earlier. So it was a big leap of faith, and I had to go and run a company in Sweden and do two things. Launch this product so my customers wouldn't abandon us. They had invested a lot. And the second is to make the company profitable because it was bleeding. And third, earn the confidence of the employees because they said, this guy is coming from America. Okay, what's he going to do in our country?
Right.
And fortunately, thanks to my brilliant employees and the framework we set up, as I explained in the book, is in 9 months, we turned profitable and we went on to take 30% market share in the world. And we did launch the product first in the world. So, there's no substitute for actually being thrown into the fire because, necessity is the mother of invention, right? Oh. And it just helps you start prioritizing. So in that case, I said, okay, first thing is I've got to basically make us profitable. Mm-hmm. Okay, because everything else was secondary. I said, if I'm bleeding money, my customers will say, when are these guys going to die? And they'll move on. My employees are going to say, there's no money. So there's going to be more layoffs. So they're going to leave. And then I'm left with nothing. So the priority one was to make us profitable. And I came up with a formula, as I explained in the book, of how to make one deal that will basically bring a lot of revenue, which may not have been super favorable in the long term, but it made me whole. I was able to cut the cost. And then once I was able to do that, I was able to get the team's confidence to focus on fixing the problems.
I love it. So you talk a lot about planning and a lot about kind of, the battle tested kind of just do it aspect, right? The action that goes along with it. And, you hear a lot, I think, on both sides of that. People say you've got to have a good plan. Other people saying you just got to get out there and just start doing it. You'll figure it out. What would be your advice, in that whole spectrum?
So I'm not a big believer in doing months of planning. I believe planning is done in days. If you know what you are doing, right, and you have the experience, you can plan in days. And then you have to have the conviction that your plan is working and put it to action. You can't basically have analysis paralysis. That doesn't work. Right. So anything I do, I try to do in a few days by thinking through systematically. And by the way, a plan doesn't have to be uber complete. You need to have the main things, what I call the critical path you need to plan. Those are the things that if they move, everything moves. Once you've nailed that down and you have the right people assigned to those tasks, you can start building things around it. Okay, because you don't have to basically start with this huge plan many years ago, I found that, sometimes people would ask me for 8 to 10 weeks of planning, and usually
Wow.
it's wrong. It's wrong because then you have to do it again.
Wow. Well, I know we're getting close to do you have to stop now? I know
No,
it's getting close
3:30.
on time.
No, I've got time.
Oh, okay, great. Well, that's great, and I think that's really good advice. Having that kind of balance between the two, having that you've got to have a plan, and it doesn't have to take forever, and contrasting that with those people who say just go for it, because especially in today's day and age with social media, there's so much kind of, let's call it, advice, right? Everybody's got an opinion on just do it. And sure, if you're stuck in that analysis paralysis, I agree. But I think that you strike this really good balance of you plan and have the those important key factors nailed down and then execute. And I think that's so many young people don't have that, right? They hear just do it and they run out. If you just do it and you head in the wrong direction and you don't have a plan on how to get to where you're going, that's a problem. But if you just sit there and plan forever and you never go anywhere, that's also a problem. So
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at it, I bring the statistic that 20% of all companies failed in 2 years, 45 in 5 years, and 65 in 10 years. And if you look at the 5 most common reasons, Forbes has an article on this. And it talks about, one is you have a product that the market doesn't want, which means you didn't plan, you didn't do analysis to whether the product is even relevant. You didn't have the right price, right? Because you had no knowledge of the market, what the market will bear. You didn't have the right people because you didn't hire them for the right jobs. Okay. Or you completely forgot competition, right? And the fifth one is you just ran out of money, which is 82% of the time. And that's what's quoted, is that people run out of money. And why is that? It's because, hey, you run at full speed and forget all the aspects that are necessary to make your business successful. So I believe planning should not be super process heavy. It should be pragmatic. And there should be regular sync points to say, are we on the right track? Or should we change? Unless you're pragmatic, you can't do that.
Yeah, and you talk in your book about having these assessments and plans in place when it comes to the kind of the actual execution of that. Like how do you go about it? Do you do a Word document and you do that, and then you set up tasks on your calendar to say, hey, review this? What's your actual hands-on? How do you go about that?
Yeah, actually, in one section in my book, I call it truffles, triage, and temperature. I think that what most leaders need and managers need to have. So I liken truffles and hogs. Hogs can smell truffles 3 feet underground. How do they do that? So a good manager leader should know and smell and sense trouble way in advance. That's like basically sniffing trouble 3 feet underground. So how do they sense trouble? They should have a certain index and metrics to say, these questions are not being answered precisely. Let me dive deeper into it. So that's how I diagnose that something is amiss. And I double click and I double click and I double click with people in the room. I don't try to do it through charts, and because it takes people too much time to do all that. You keep asking questions till you actually get to the root cause. Okay. And that is basically, and I call this go see for yourself. A boss of mine, Katsumi Ihara-san taught me this. It's a word in Japanese. I'm probably mispronouncing it. It's called Gemba Genbitsu. It means go see for yourself. Forget translation. Forget the bias of translation. Go get down to the root cause yourself. Once you've got to the root cause, assign it to the right people and give them clear directions what you want to look at. Don't let it be scattered so they go off and do 50 million things. because that just confuses everyone. And the third thing is you got to manage the temperature of your team. If you are banging the table, yelling, screaming, and scaring people, okay, they're not going to be able to do anything. You have to systematically actually guide them and be part of the solution and manage their temperature. And I always tell them, if it fails, guys, it's my neck. Okay, it's not yours, but I want you to try these things, right? Which gives them the confidence to go ahead and try it, because if you're always afraid of failure, then you're going to be paralyzed. And so I want them to be at their best problem solving mode when they have a difficult problem. Now, of course, there are pressures, there's timelines, customers are screaming at you. But usually in such situations, I also basically become the interface to the customer so that I can basically have that discussion and don't expose the team. So that's what I do. And I don't like long slide meetings with 50 slides. And I like to basically talk about a problem in each meeting. And I like to only talk about that problem. And then if you have a different problem, we have a different meeting.
Yeah, I like that. Well, going back to your book and the original intent, who would you say is the ideal reader?
So I wrote this for, as I said earlier, I wish I had a book like this when I became a general manager. So I really wrote this for those aspiring minds who want to learn to build a business and run a business or grow in their career with the things they've not been exposed to in a more practical manner. And I felt that if I brought together all of the elements of a business rather than one aspect, I would create this cross-functional ability to look holistically at a business. I also wrote it for BBA and MBA students who would like to basically augment their theoretical knowledge they learned in school with practical knowledge of how to apply that with recipes and structure. And it also can help financial people who want to look at a company from inside out rather than outside in. I liken evaluating a company from its financial statements and management commentary to actually assessing an iceberg without sonar. And I'm hoping that this would become the book's framework will become the sonar, because you don't see 9/10 of a company by just looking at those statements.
Sure.
Okay. And it's also good for consulting companies as to what questions to ask. How may they solve difficult problems in companies?
So you'd say that there's more of the this helps going back to that financial person. This would be more of the how to assess the sort of intrinsic value versus the kind of the fundamental values. Is that kind of what you're saying? That gives them kind of a framework for that to understand it?
Exactly. Because when you ask the questions I ask in the book, you can ask, is their cash flow real or not? Mm-hmm. Right? Is it going to be sustainable? Is their strategy even going to win? Right? Is their culture aligned to deliver to the strategy? How are they thinking about products and sustainability versus competition and consumer desire to make the product sticky? What are they doing on delivery of a product in timing, in quality, in cost? How are they thinking? Because if they're not thinking about these three things maniacally, they're not going to be in business for long. How do they think about their sales channels? How are they thinking about their funnels? How do they think about managing the complexity of forecasting and channel management? And finally, how are they dealing with investors, customers, and employees to maintain their confidence? All of these things, when tied together, really defines how a business is run. And you can quickly, when I use my checklist, there are many companies I'm asked to advise on. And the investors ask me, would you invest in this? And I can tell them quickly, after an analysis plus talking to the company, not otherwise. You can't do it just on paper. You have to actually talk to them. You can then point out what are the pros and cons, and then it's up to the investor to decide whether they want to invest.
That's great. And so, well, let me ask you. I guess we're probably not here to discuss too much of Uhnder, but if you don't mind, I think it's really fascinating, and I really like the idea. Can you run us through what Uhnder is? What the goal is, what their product is, because I think the whole radar on a chip is a super cool idea, and then we'll get into how you apply your book to Uhnder. But if you could, a kind of an overview of Uhnder would be great.
Yeah. Uhnder is we build a radar chip. Most people think of radar as these big things.
That's right.
That look for aircraft and enemy missiles and things like that. But people have been using radar in automotive applications for 30 years. Okay. These are small little objects, little bigger than your smartphone, that are mounted on the bumper or some part of the car that tries to look at objects, right, through fog, rain, any weather conditions, and says, okay, do I need to brake? So automatic emergency braking is based on radar. Okay, automatic cruise control is also basically done through radar. Lane keeping assist is done through radar. There are a lot of automated conditions or automated driver assistance of an automobile that goes on because of sensors. So we thought that, hey, we need modern radar. It's quite different from what people have been building. One of the biggest things is resolution. How do we resolve objects in finer resolution so you actually see them completely? This has been a challenge because, for example, if you have a child next to a car, many radars will look at them as one object.
Right.
But when the child starts moving away, suddenly you say, okay, the child's moved away from the car. Now there are two objects, but you're too close to brake and effectively. Our radar actually can resolve objects in very fine resolution. The other thing is when two cars are coming towards each other in opposite lanes, the radars shine on each other and they jam each other, which means they go blind. And our radar is more resistance to that jamming. So it actually sees objects even when it's being jammed. Wow. And sometimes you have to combine these sensors. Like a camera is great to look at shapes and colors. Radar is great at detecting objects even in bad weather. If you can somehow combine them, then you get the best of both worlds. That's called fusion. And our radar has some capabilities that greatly enhances fusion to make this whole area opens up a complete new field. And what we've been able to do is to put this very sophisticated radar on something as big as your thumbnail. Okay, it's really small. And others who are trying to mimic what we are doing, they actually require 5 set chips when we require 1. So that's why it's cool. And so it's fascinating. And we are very excited.
That is fantastic. Well, let me ask you. So I love my Tesla, and it's, and I thought it was doing something kind of similar to that, where it's using cameras for most of the stuff, but I know it's got the sensors for maybe that's just parking stuff or proximity sensors. Maybe it's not using. Do you know? And is that something that you guys are looking to kind of get into, or how's that?
Well, we are looking to get into a lot of automobiles, and we are working actually at the moment with customers, and it's been announced that we will be in real cars in a couple of months. So it's very exciting. Now, we, of course, are not like ultrasonic proximity sensors. You can use it, but our system is too sophisticated for just that. Our system is much more for applications where you need radar around the car. What is happening is people are thinking of 5 to 10 radars per car to give you a 360-degree protection against what's coming towards you and what's moving away from you. Right. And as the car gets more automated, these sensors will only grow in prominence. So I think it's super exciting. But that's not the only place we are in. We are also in, and I don't want to make this a pitch for Uhnder. Excuse me. But we are in ports, and we use automated vehicles which drive using radar. And they are used to basically pick containers of ships, load it, and take it to certain places rather than having a manual way of operating it. And it's
Yeah.
far more efficient. There are a lot of industrial applications for radar too. So the market is very large.
Oh, that's fantastic. Are you allowed to share with us what cars might be using under in the coming months and years?
No, we're not allowed to. But
No, fair enough.
I think it's just really excited that we're there's a lot of things a lot of gates we have to go through,
Mhm.
and we've systematically passed each one of them, and we have a few more in the next 2 months, and then hopefully 2 or 3 months, and then hopefully we are on the road.
Well, congratulations. That is very exciting stuff. So let me ask you. So you've got when it comes to under and this I can't help but think back to your very first job where you are creating this algorithm that it's never been done before, right? This a radar on a chip, never been done before, right? And and then when you apply things that like you talk about it in your book, these kind of business processes and analyzing a business and understanding this, how do you take that thing that's never been done before, right? Algorithm, chip, product, whatever. Nobody's done it before, or certainly, you know, you haven't, or you don't know anybody who has on your team. So you're basically doing the unknown, the yet to have been done. And then when you apply these systems to that, how do you know when you apply that, that okay, that's gonna do it. We can do this, right? I mean, that how do you make that leap from the unknown? You make a plan. Is there planning that you can do to kind of mitigate that all? Or in the end, is there still a leap of faith that where you're like, yeah, it's never been done before, but we can certainly do it. We might be able to do it. There's a chance we could do it. Probably not going to happen. How's that work, right? How do you go from that,
Yeah.
and bridge that?
Yeah, a lot of people have, by the way, just one um, point is that other people have built radar, but they're normally two chips and they're combined, and we've combined all of it in one with far more capability. But the point you're making, Matt, is very interesting. When you think about these novel ideas, like, my teams actually were responsible for building the first 2G phones, the the first 3G phones, and all these new technologies that you're right, nobody else had. Many people were working on it, but we were fortunate to be among the first. And here again, it comes up. It's really again being systematic and thinking through how you do it. Right? You have to basically be able to piece together everything that goes to building such a product and hiring people who are experts in each of those fields to actually realize the best version of that component and then putting it together as a system and ironing out the problems and giving yourself time to do that. And this requires not just smarts and planning, but deep conviction. Because very often in this process, right, we find that, we are stuck with a very difficult problem. And I'll give you one example. When we were bringing out the 3G chipset, it was very complex, 800 people working on it, right? And we had to test it all over the world, and things were breaking. And I finally told my team, no, 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 guys, I think we are trying to boil the ocean. We shouldn't do that. Let us focus on one network operator who really wants it and one customer who really wants to work with us. Let's narrow the requirements to just meet what they want. And my goal was, if I can launch it commercially in that place, that would be the evidence that it works. Then I could build upon it, because success builds upon success.
Right.
By just trimming that, I remember my chief operating officer came and said, he said, "You just saved us." And we went ahead and did exactly that. I launched it ahead of my competitors. One of my customers made 4 billion in his first quarter. It was a huge success, and everything went from there. So to me, I like getting wins along the way, because that's the only way to keep the team motivated.
Yeah. That's I mean, there's just so many great lessons like that that you kind of put in the book and lay out for people. And I love how you use all these great analogies, like, like boiling the ocean, and just the book is kind of, I don't want to say littered with them, but it's filled with great just kind of practical advice, and it's a fun read as well, at the same time. And I think that's hard to strike that balance. I think for a lot of people, I think it tends to get very either preachy, or I don't want to say self-helpy, because that's not even a thing, just made that up. But it tends to, or it's just very dry. And I think that you've got so many great stories in here that you apply to people, that it was just a great read. So kudos on that. I mean,
Thank you. No, but I have to give the credit to I dedicated the book to my wife of 33 years and all the people who worked for me or worked with me. Because every person who worked with me, this book is as much their story as mine, because they are the ones who actually helped make things happen. They are the ones who helped me correct my mistakes. And I made a ton of them. So, if you don't have a great team, I have a common saying. I said, we talk about armies because I talk about castles and armies, but every general is only as good as his army.
well, let me ask you, what advice would you give on hiring the right, soldiers for your army, if you will, to take that analogy a little further?
Yeah, whenever I do an interview, of course I look for competence. There's no substitute for competence. But I dwell more on two things. First, I try to find out what the person knows. Many interviewers try to find out what the person does not know. That is stupid. You should basically try to find out what they know, and can you apply what they know to your business. And the second thing is, I look for attitude. I try to find out, I give them practical examples and say, here's a problem I'm facing. How would you solve it? Or how would you go about solving it? You don't have to give me the answer. What's your thinking? Right? And that tells me how they think. And I ask them, how do you work with other people? Tell me your style. So my interviews tend to be a little broader in trying to figure out, I'm really trying everyone who interviews with me, I try to find out, is there a fit between this person and my organization? I'm not looking to reject them. I'm trying to see, is there a fit? Can I use this person in this job or this job or this job? And if it's not, then of course it's not a fit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you seem to have you have this very kind of gracious style of leadership. And so it makes me wonder, is it that you have had the right team? You in many cases hired those people, or is it you know, more that you had good people? Maybe they weren't the best people, but having a leader that was so gracious and giving with in terms of credit and support, does that help make a decent, soldier a great soldier? Do you think that's, part of the secret?
First, I don't know whether I'm gracious today. I think when I was younger, I was a little hot-headed and
Yeah, weren't we all?
impatient, and all of the things that go with being younger and being, you know, um, uh, whatever. But I think time has taught me a lot. I found out that some things that I did were just wrong, and you have to acknowledge that.
Mhm.
You have to know who you are. You have to stay true. And I think, but what I have been, there are two things that I've done, I think, well. And one thing where probably I would change, I probably am quite a demanding manager in that I demand a tremendous amount of productivity and to keep your commitment. Okay. But at the same time, I've been fair. I've had the managerial courage not to just have friends. Okay. I park my friendship badge at the door when I walk in every day. Okay. I have no friends. Right. And I'm good at parceling work out and good at educating people how to solve things. So I've done that well because my goal is the reason I'm demanding and I educate is I want them to be the best soldiers they can be, to one day take my job and lead others. I'm actually trying to work myself out of a job because if I can do that, then there's something else waiting for me.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the philosophy I have used. And over time, I've mellowed. I'm 65 today, and the gray hair shows that I've mellowed a lot.
Sure. Well, I think, you talk about two things there that I'd like to kind of dig in on a little bit is the being true to yourself you mentioned, and then at the same time learning. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, a lot of people hear be true to yourself, and for a lot of people that makes them kind of more static, more obstinate to change, right? They're like, well, who am I? And people are constantly like, well, this is who I am, so I can't change and evolve and grow because then I'm not that person anymore. And I think a lot of people struggle with that in I don't know, maybe life, right? In growing as an individual and realizing that their identity can grow and they can grow and learn from those lessons. Um, because as you said early on, you were very hot-headed, and now not so much. Is that what you're trying to say with be true to yourself and still like learn lessons? Is that kind of the
No,
takeaway there?
I think what I mean by stay true to yourself is two things. Believe in yourself because no one will believe in you more. Okay. The second is understand yourself. Understand your strengths and weaknesses. And the day you acknowledge that, you can address your weaknesses. Otherwise, you can't, right?
Yeah.
Because, I did a survey. They did a survey of me in one organization. They did a 360-degree view, bosses, peers, um, employees. And they rated us on three categories: affiliation, that means how you get along with other people, etc., power, and accomplishment. I think it's called the Hayes survey or something like that. But the guys, when they gave me the result, they actually told me that my results were interesting because what I thought of myself, they asked you to rate yourself, and then they asked all these people to rate you. They said that the scores were within 2% of each other. So I felt, okay, I think I know myself. And that allowed me to actually reflect on my weaknesses, right? Strengths, of course, I think that everyone recognizes. But what about the weaknesses? Are you willing to confront them? And I had a lot.
Yeah. Well, I think that's such a really important piece, and really it's rather profound. That and I think a lot of people kind of, well, it's not comfortable, right? People don't like looking at the bad in them, the weak parts. And I think maybe it's partly the engineer in you, right? That's like, well, what is broken? What is not as good, as efficient, as optimal as the other pieces? Well, let's get it that way, right? So is it that you take more of an engineering mindset, whereas other people would be more philosophical about that, and they'd look at themselves that way? Is that why perhaps it seems so comfortable for you to look at that, and other people might struggle?
No, it was actually, I took a more human look at it. And the thing is, the engineering mindset actually helps you rationalize, and you can't do that. But I asked myself, right, when I was in a tough situation, I went back and asked myself, I used to go on runs and I used to say, hey, did I handle this really well? I have three sayings, which one of them actually, one or two of them are very appropriate. There are three favorite sayings. I say this everywhere. I write it in articles. But Bertrand Russell said, he said, conquering fear is the first step to wisdom. So when you're confronted with something, deal with it. You will learn a lot from it. The second thing is, Lord Thomas Dewar said, the mind is like a parachute. It only functions when opened. So listen to feedback, and it's okay, and I've not always done that. So, I probably, as I said, I was a hothead, I was arrogant, all of these things. But, you change with time. And so I think it's really important to reflect and to, you don't always have to be wrong. Sometimes you're right, and then you don't have to change. You have to have the conviction not to change.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that you try to figure out and ask yourself honest questions and then proceed from there.
Now, I couldn't agree more. I mean, this is really, that's incredibly helpful stuff. I mean, I think for every entrepreneur, every manager, every student going through, graduating college or high school and going off into the world, that is right. Those are very fundamental and important things, that will help you be successful. That I don't think you find in many other books, and in a lot of those conversations. And I think you strike that a really good balance. You're filled with lots of great knowledge and lots in your book here that you're, basically giving away. I mean, it's ridiculous how much information is in a what was it, a $20 book or something. And it's clearly thousands and thousands of dollars and, many thousands of hours of knowledge, really just kind of packed in there in a very enjoyable way. So before we go, your book can be found on Amazon.com. Is that right?
That's correct. It's on Amazon. Absolutely.
And is there any place you'd like people to go to find out more information about you and or your book?
Yeah, you can go to my website. It's www.sandeepchennakeshu. It's a long name, but if you Google, you can get my name.com. There's a website. It tells you there. And on that website, you can also place bulk orders if you want. And write to me at sandeep.keshu@yahoo.com. And I'm sure I can help out. And I've enjoyed talking to you, Matt. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for coming on the show. And again, for anybody interested, great read. Check it out on Amazon.com. Your company is your castle. All right. Thanks, Sandeep. Appreciate it.
Thank you, man. Thank you again. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.